Unless you know the story, you would never guess that this painting tells a tale of longing and distance. But that's what makes a great painting. It requires no explanation. There should be actors in this scene, but they've departed, leaving only the stage scenery, which repeats itself, flower by flower, over 7 meters, until the flowers themselves become the storytellers. It's a quiet kind of genius, taking one thing and making it everything. Ogata Kōrin painted this pair of screens around 1701. They were commissioned for the Nishi-Honganji Temple, which during Kōrin's lifetime was the largest temple in Kyoto, and you can still visit today. The screens look like nothing else that anyone had ever painted. Most paintings of flowers back then were all too predictable. Kōrin was not the first painter to take an imagined landscape as their subject, and other painters before him had limited their palette to just 2 colors. But no one had ever created a choreography of flowers lavishly brushed over a gold background, engaging our eyes in the pastime they love the most. A hide and seek of finding similarities, contrasts, and trying to decode the rhythm that holds it all together. Just as 200 years later, Monet would make water lilies his signature, Kōrin made irises his. He had found a subject he could render in such a distinctive way that, for most Japanese, when they see irises in nature, they associate the flower with Kōrin. The screens stand at 1.5 meters, or 5 feet, about the height of a person in early modern Japan. When you sit on the floor to view them, you are eye to eye with the flowers and enveloped by the irises. It's like being indoors and outdoors at the same time. Japanese artists in Kōrin's time, as well as a handful today, use mineral pigments made from crushed precious stones for their paint. The blue pigment for the flowers is made from azurite. The green for the leaves is made from malachite. The reason these 2 dynamite colors rhyme is because azurite and malachite are brother and sister, you could say, of the same mineral, copper carbonate, which is also why they're often clustered together. Their vibrant colors emerge over thousands of centuries as copper reacts with CO2-rich groundwater that percolates through the rocks. It's relatively straightforward to trace the steps a painter took in creating a work. First, Kōrin sketched out the areas where the flowers should be placed. Then, gold leaf was applied across the entire surface except for the places where he had drawn the flowers. This was not about saving money on gold. The heavy blue pigment adheres better to paper than to gold leaf. The thick application of pigment gives Kōrin's irises a surface that does much more than catch the light. It calls to mind the soft plush texture of the iris itself, that curious velvet skin found in no other flower. Like Gustav Klimt in Vienna 2 centuries later, Kōrin challenged his wealthy patrons artistically, but through his skillful use of expensive materials like gold and precious stones, he spoke to them in a language they could understand: luxury. The screens are inspired by an episode in Ise Monogatari, the Tales of Ise. The main character of the story, Narihira, after having been exiled from Kyoto after an affair with a high-ranking lady of the court, stops at Yatsuhashi, a place where a stream branches into 8 channels, each with its own bridge. When the travelers came to a place called Yatsuhashi, the river fanned out into 8 streams, with a bridge over each one. The marsh was full of irises in magnificent bloom. The sight moved a companion to say, "Make a poem about our journey." The name of the flower does not appear in the poem, but if you isolate the opening characters of each line, you get the 5 characters spelling the word for iris, kaketsubata. People in those days took composing poems on the spot very seriously. Upper-class Japanese would challenge each other to capture the moment in verse, which, if good enough, would later remind everyone of that precious moment. So the next time there's an awesome sunset, don't reach for your phone unless you're checking a rhyming dictionary. An educated viewer would instantly recognize that Kōrin's irises refer to the poem in the Tales of Ise. Kōrin's screen combines 3 of the great themes of classical literature: the beauty of nature, a journey taken unwillingly with some nostalgia for the capital thrown in, and finally, love itself. Actually depicting the persons in the drama would have killed it and made it kitsch. Kōrin isn't just painting irises, he's composing with them. Each bloom follows a distinctive structure. 3 petals reach upward, and 3 lazily extend outward, as if reclining into an invisible sofa. No 2 flowers are the same. Each flower describes a different melody, which together create an entire composition, a sort of visual Johann Sebastian Bach. 2 sets of 3 notes, expanding in opposite directions, unfolding into a shape so clear and balanced that no matter how many variations follow, the original form remains recognizable. Perhaps one of the reasons why no one had painted a screen like this before is because everyone else was too focused on making every flower look perfect, literally not being able to see the forest for the trees. Other painters prided themselves on their lineage and mastery, rightly so, since this is what the public judged them on. As we saw in part 1, Kōrin didn't belong to any established school of painting. Socially, he was an insider, but artistically, a complete outsider. If he was going to leave his mark on the art world, he needed to think beyond the screen. He turned to Koetsu and Sōtatsu, those 2 innovative Kyoto masters who preceded him by a century and absorbed their techniques, aesthetics, and methods. One of those was kata-oshi, a technique for stamping patterns onto paper. Stamps depicting bamboo, birds, flowers, leaves, to name just a few, are applied systematically or seemingly at random, creating patterns that feel natural, even spontaneous. Different pigments, mixed to varying consistencies, create a surprising range of textures. It is controlled in precision, rough and serendipitous at the same time. The result is wondrous. It's as if the cost-effectiveness of the printing press has been fused with the expressive power of real brushwork. Kōrin didn't actually use stamps for the iris flowers or leaves, but the idea of repetition shaped his entire strategy for tackling such a large painting. Remember that Kōrin spent his entire life around fabric. His father made his fortune selling kimonos. And in Japanese textiles, repetition is everything. Kōrin took that idea and ran with it. He realized he could paint 2 panels with essentially the same scene. To do that, he used a stencil to lay out clusters of flowers, repeating whole groups of irises, not once, but twice. And he did it so subtly, with sleight of hand rivaling a pickpocket, you don't even notice what's missing, or, in this case, what's been slipped back in. It's anything but mechanical because he improvises everything else. The flowers may be copied, but the spacing between the leaves, shifts, and the stems all lean differently. There's an unusual symmetry to the composition. The zigzag of the leaf bases on the right screen is mirrored, or rather inverted, in the foliage on the left. Kōrin had a younger brother, Kenzan, who was also an artist, a potter. Kōrin's irises had quickly resonated with the public, and together with Kenzan, the 2 brothers wasted no time monetizing Kōrin's stunning design. Kenzan's hands sculpted the clay, and Kōrin's brush turned it into a work of art. Whether folding screens to partition a space, or fans for staying cool, or just looking cool, Kōrin transformed things that had a function into something sublime. Everything his brush touched didn't just fulfill a function, it transcended it. Long before there were 5-figure luxury gadgets, there were Kōrin's writing boxes and ink trays, some of his most spectacular works. Kōrin's writing boxes, decorated with enamel and precious stones, weren't just for storing writing implements, they conveyed status. To call this a box is like saying the Taj Mahal is just another building. Writing then was a ritual, and this gold and silver temple contained ceremonial tools for composing manuscripts. It's both amusing and tragic that we, the exalted species, have regressed to typing with our 2 thumbs. Who still experiences the sensation, the deliberateness, of dipping a brush into ink and creating intertwining sculpture out of our thoughts and the silence between them? Kōrin was able to capitalize on the iris trend, painting them on everything paint would stick to. But it is another artist whose bad luck in business was off the charts, who's hands down the winner in iris notoriety. His iris motifs appear everywhere, on scarves, shopping bags, coffee cups. He is the Dutch painter whose name neither rhymes with show nor with cough, Vincent van Gogh. On May 8, 1889, Van Gogh checked himself in a psychiatric hospital in Saint-Remy de Provence following a period of intense emotional instability, to put it mildly. The next morning, he carried his paints and canvas into the hospital's walled garden where he found a bed of irises, the flowers vivid in their springtime pomp and backgrounded by the russet yellows of marigolds. Compare Kōrin's irises to those Van Gogh painted in 1889. Van Gogh's painting tightly crops to a smaller group of irises. He frames them as if he is crouched down in front of them. In fact, judging by the debris that's trapped in the thick oil paint, Van Gogh probably did crouch down and put the canvas on the ground instead of painting standing up with the canvas on an easel. Van Gogh invented a new format halfway between still life and landscape, combining Japan and Provence in his unmistakable visual language. Van Gogh was an avid collector of Japanese woodblock prints, and irises were a prominent element in many of them. He adopted the strong contours and outlines characteristic of woodblock prints, adding his own touch by reinflating their flattened perspective. The inherently Japanese orderliness and nobility of Kōrin's irises is nowhere to be found. Instead, Van Gogh captures the unruly and particular ecstasy of each flower. Here, the emphasis is on individual shape and volume, not just of the flowers, but also of the blade-like leaves. Whereas Kōrin immerses the viewer in the irises, they're still at arm's length. Van Gogh pulls us closer, so they leap off the canvas towards us. The red soil is a launch pad for the rocketing green leaves, and the orange and yellow marigolds push the flowers forward to center stage. Coincidentally, Van Gogh's irises were originally much closer to the deeper color of Kōrin's irises. However, the red pigment that he mixed with blue to achieve purple has faded considerably, with the result that the petals we see today are merely blue. 1 year earlier, Van Gogh was captivated by the colors of the landscape around the town of Arles. He particularly loved the contrast between the yellow and purple flowers in the fields. In that colorful landscape, he saw a reflection of the world he knew from his collection of Japanese prints. Japanese artists used large areas of color in their compositions, often with a sharp diagonal. Describing the scene in a letter to his brother Theo, he wrote, "It's like something out of a Japanese dream." During the last 5 years of his life, Kōrin painted a second pair of iris folding screens. This is the largest work that he ever produced, standing nearly 180 centimeters high, each screen nearly 4 meters wide. The screens would have towered above the viewer. That Kōrin would return to one of his most popular motifs a decade later and paint irises reloaded is no surprise. By this point, the depiction of irises was just as much associated with the Tales of Ise as it was with Kōrin. Not letting a business opportunity slip through his fingers, Kōrin had been churning out tons of iris merch. Tableware, lacquer writing boxes, kimonos, fans, anything you could reproduce an iris on. This time, he made the screens even bigger. And the rules are, if you are creating this sequel, you must introduce a new character. This time, a giant bridge, the 8-plank bridge, spanning across both screens. Just as he did in Red and White Plum Blossoms, where he suggested the immensity of the older tree by showing less of it, we see just enough of it so that we understand that it extends far beyond the frame. If in the first version, Kōrin felt that removing the bridge would heighten the drama, why did he reinstate it for the second version? The bridge is not an embellishment. It stands center stage. It leads off into the unknown. For the viewer, It references the bridge in the story. For the artist, especially one nearing the end of his life, perhaps it depicts leaving the life he had created behind and venturing into the beyond. The bridge crosses a river which we cannot see. We must already be on the journey, as neither the beginning nor the end of the bridge is visible. In the bare gold background, water and soil, river and banks have dissolved into one. The plank's supports are the only indication that the bridge is hovering above something. And then there is the color of the bridge. Instead of straight grain depicting brown wooden planks, the bridge is bluish gray, similar to the lead strips that depict the 8 planks on the writing box. Remember that in the earlier version of the painting, the areas where paint were to go were left ungilded. That made practical sense. Gold leaf is slick, and paint doesn't adhere well to it. And of course, less gold means more money stays in the artist's pocket. In irises at Yatsuhashi, gold leaf is applied over the entire surface of the painting, even under the flowers. As before, Kōrin begins with an underdrawing sketched in sumi ink. Remember, pencils hadn't been invented yet, but this time with his brush. He lays out the entire composition on the gold, flowers, leaves, stalks, and of course the bridge. This sounds straightforward enough. However, it's a quiet but telling sign of how confident Kōrin had become, fully aware that when he set his brush down onto expansive gold leaf, he had one chance to get it right. The blue flowers, despite some of the damage to the painting, are more brilliant, more lifelike than the heavy stylized petals of the first version. Here, Kōrin solves 2 problems at once. Before painting the blue flowers, he applied a white ground made from finely crushed oyster shell. That gave the rough azurite pigment something to cling to. More importantly, the white ground lights up the color from behind, making the blue almost luminous. But the flowers weren't finished yet. Then came a wash of indigo, deepening the shadows and giving the petals shape. That extra step expanded the range of brightness and allowed him to model volume with surprising subtlety. And finally, a touch of lac dye, a pinkish pigment that adds a soft violet cast to the blue and a warm, almost blushing note at the center of the flowers. Irises at Yatsuhashi shows Kōrin's maturity as a painter. There's more gradation in the colors, and the composition breathes more freely. The elements aren't crammed together like in the first version, where the petals are more voluptuous and the leaves densely packed. One of my favorite additions in later painting are these 2 flowers that are half open. The first version has a kind of raw energy. Everything presses in from all sides, like it's rush hour in the Tokyo metro. It made sense then. Kōrin was taking on his biggest project and had something to prove. The second painting reflects a more refined eye and the technique of someone who no longer needs to shout. In 1953, irises at Yatsuhashi were sold to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. The earlier 1701 screens have remained in Japan, where they reside at the Nezu Museum in Tokyo. Kōrin's masterpieces are now spread across 2 continents, allowing viewers on both sides of the globe to appreciate his genius. Kōrin's irises don't grace as many tote bags as Van Gogh's. However, the Japanese have found more subtle ways to honor Kōrin's legacy. Up until 2024, his irises graced the 5,000 yen note, and in 2017, they were commemorated as postage stamps. Kōrin's irises carry messages across oceans, echoing Narihira's 1,000-year-old poem, which laments separation. What Kōrin achieved with his irises transcends mere decoration. He took a moment from classical literature and transformed it into something eternal. Kōrin was alert to possibilities other artists had missed. He seized upon endless repetition to create magic from what could have been monotony. 3 centuries later, his irises continue to work their quiet magic on each new generation that discovers them.